Hello, everybody, and welcome to World Vue Summit. Today, I'm Alex. Not today, I'm always Alex. I'm Alex. I'm here from Atlanta Vue.js Meetup. And with me, who are also my co-conspirators on this current stream, are Sebren, who is a core member of Vue in Belgium, and a core member of Chakra UI Vue. And I have Leon with me, who is a team member of Vue.js, who's from Cologne, and we are here today to give you like some interesting talks and stuff. So hey Sebren, hey Leon, how y'all
Hey,
doing?
good evening. I mean, for me, it's evening.
Oh yeah, it's 1 o'clock
So,
here.
all good, all good. Really looking forward for this. So,
Yeah,
it's
cool.
going
Great
to be
talks.
awesome.
Yeah, Leon, how are you?
Great. Everything's fine.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about our first speaker today. Today we have here with us, we have Jonathan Bakebwa, who is the co-founder of Vue Beijing and maintainer and creator of Chakra UI Vue. And he is going to give us a talk about Chakra UI Vue. Hey, Jonathan, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing, Alex? Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
Yay, welcome. Okay, so it is extremely late where Jonathan is right now. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning. So we are going to play a pre-recorded talk that he has already given at VueConf US. However, if you have questions as the talk is playing, feel free to ask questions. Jonathan will be in the chat over in the YouTube channel, and you'll be able to ask him questions and he can respond as things are going. After this first talk, we will have Reinier, who's going to come on and talk about building better components with state machines. So stay tuned for that afterwards. But yeah, cool. Jonathan, do you have any sage advice or words of wisdom before we go into this talk at all?
Um,
Nope. Cool.
no, at the moment, I don't have any sage advice. I'm just so excited, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, with that, I give you Jonathan Bakebwa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Bakebwa. I am the creator and maintainer of Chakra UI Vue, and I'm excited to be here at VueConf US to be talking about Chakra UI with you, and I'm really excited. So let's get into it. So tonight, my talk is going to be about what is coming to V1 of Chakra UI, and perhaps for those of us that are not, yet familiar with Chakra UI, what is Chakra UI? So Chakra UI Vue is a component library that is built around accessibility, that allows you to rapidly prototype user interfaces, whose theming API is also extensible. So that way you can build beautiful and accessible applications with speed. That is the sort of like the alma mater of Chakra UI Vue. So Chakra UI is also available not only in Vue.js but also for React. So if you're a React developer and you're watching this talk, feel free to also check out Chakra UI. Go to chakraui.com, go to vue.chakraui.com, and you can learn more about what Chakra UI is and what we are doing and what our vision is. Cool. I wanted to start out by showing what people have built with Chakra UI. And you can build interfaces like blogs, such as this one. Somebody built this really beautiful blog. I thought to feature it as well here. And you can also build, actual enterprise applications. And this was built by it's used by Memorial Health Systems, and they're using it to schedule vaccinations for COVID. And I thought it was really good because this is a kind of a validation for the fact that the Chakra UI components are actually accessible and they're being used in healthcare systems for which you expect that the interface is accessible to all its users. And we also have, people have built interesting landing pages. I thought this was really cool and fancy. People also built like very data heavy applications as well. So this is one job applications, I believe, that is based in Indonesia. I thought this was really beautiful. Also, you can also build landing pages as well with Chakra UI Vue, and this is a really interesting project as well. And interestingly, somebody built this rebuilt their blog accidentally because they were trying out Chakra UI Vue, and I thought it was funny, so I thought I might take a screenshot and add it into my slides just to show you how convenient it is to use, and hopefully today you can learn a few things and see that it's actually possible to build accessible apps that are beautiful. It doesn't have to be a pain to do so. And this is the website that she built. This is her blog. Her name is Alina Nikolaeva, I believe. I hope I didn't butcher that. And this entire application is actually dark mode ready, and I thought this was really good. And there's also this Instagram clone that I built. It's not really Instagram, in case you're wondering, but it's just to demonstrate how flexible the theming API is. So great, what about growth? So Chakra UI has been available for about 8 months now at the time of recording this talk. And within the last year, these are some of the things that we've achieved. We've hit 550 plus downloads per month in 1 year, which I think is really good. And we've also had 1,000 stars on GitHub. Our team has grown to 6 core contributors and 20,900 people on our Discord. We share the Discord with React, in case you're wondering, the React team. Yeah, and I think this is something worth celebrating. So to all our contributors and to all the people that support Chakra UI, thank you very much. I believe we still have a world to conquer, but this is really impressive, and I believe it's only going upward from here. So what's coming to version 1 of Chakra UI, which we have conveniently named Chidori, because it is hard to say Chakra UI Vue for Vue 1, Vue V1 for Vue 3. It's a bit difficult, it's a bit of a mouthful. So Chidori was the code name that we came up with, the community shared with us. So what's coming to Chidori? The biggest thing that's coming to Chidori is an improvement in the theming API. And this will allow you to customize Chakra's internal components, as well as author your own custom components. We also improved the tooling such that we can give and provide better developer experience when working with Chakra UI. And we've also done a lot of internal work with the maintenance of the code base, and to also make it easy for other people to contribute. So it's something I'm actually interested in having more people get to know of. So if you're interested in contributing to Chakra UI, you can do so quite easily. And we'll also be providing some pro UI components, and all of these things I'm going to labor to show us a bit more about tonight. So what about theming? Let's talk theming. So in the component theming API, we improved the developer experience for customizing Chakra UI components. So you can also define custom variants. You can customize the sizes of the different components. You can also create your own sizes. And we also exported the Chakra factory function that you can use to Chakra UIfy different components in your Vue application. And you can also create and theme your own UI applications. So in a sense, what this theming API has provided a gateway for you to has provided a language for you to create your own components with Chakra UI's styling API, and which is really powerful. And I don't think I'll be able to demonstrate everything with creating your own Chakra UI components because of time in this talk, but I'm going to show you how, just a high level implementation of what can you do with V1. What are you going to be able to do with Chidori? So let's talk about theme overrides. So I'd like to override the styles of, say, a button component. So in order to do that, we created a components key inside the theme object. This is how it works. So when you import Chakra and you register the plugin, under the extend theme property, we have a components.button, and then you can provide the default styles that all Chakra UI buttons within your application will inherit right under that property. And here's what it looks like in practice. So here is a basic checkout button, but we have a design system that our designer gave us because they use Figma, and Figma people are fancy, and they give us these files with different styles. And for some reason, let's say you don't want to have to rewrite the entire button because it looks different, because a button's a button. You just need to make it appear differently. So the way that you would do this is in Chakra UI, you can then import the extend theme function from Chakra UI, and this will give you access to the entire theme object, and then we'll give you some APIs to override it. So under the components, the button, the base style key, we then change the color of the button. We can change the font family, text transform. You can change as many properties as you wish to change, and you can even provide some hover and focus states, some pseudo states as well. And we can also change the focus color of the focus rings, and You can also use CSS variables to access the theme properties, essentially. So then we import our theme and then provide it into our plugin under the extend theme option, and voila, we have a button. And all Chakra UI buttons within your application will inherit these base styles, and they can also be overridden, as I will show us later on. So what about creating custom variants? So you can now create your own variants in Chakra UI. And the way that you do that is, again, under the extend theme.components.button.variants option, you can define your own variants, which are also color mode aware. And the way that you do that is you'd feed it a function with the props, and you can use the props to change the values of the styles. But we don't need to do that for this demo. And so this is what it looks like. So continuing from our previous example, we had this checkout button, and now we'd like to add a cancel button, but the cancel button shouldn't have the same visual hierarchy as the checkout button. So we wanted to have the checkout button have like a primary, feel to it. So under our theme object, again, we'll then create a variants option, and under variants, we define the primary variant. And we then give it a few styles. We want it to have a border, want to have it a more solid background, we want to change the text color, and when the user hovers over it, we want to slightly darken the style of the button, and we then save. And then to access that variant, we then pass in the variant prop with the name of the variant, and voila, we have a primary variant button, just like that. And you can create your own variants. You can name them whatever you want, it's all up to you. So what about creating custom sizes? You can also do the same thing using the same API. Theme.components.button.sizes. You can create your own sizes. And this is what it looks like in practice. So most Chakra UI components export a button, export like a component with like a size prop. So the button has a size prop, for example. Let's say you need something that's, bigger than like what we usually ship. So we can then create a component here. Let's put mega in it, and we still want it to be a variant primary, and let's give it a size of mega. And this is going to break the button, as you can see, because we don't have the size mega defined in our theme. So under the theme object, we'll then create, I actually made a typo here at the time I was recording this, but this object of mega should be under the sizes property. So you'd have mega, you can give it a height of 120 pixels, a width of 200 pixels, give it a font size of like extra large. At this point it still breaks because I didn't put it under the right key, but now it's working. Okay, I type sizes, and then we put in the mega size and the definition for the mega size, the styles for the mega size, and voila, we now have a mega button in our application, which is amazing, just like that. So the other thing that we exported with the theming API is this Chakra factory function, and the way that you use it is to essentially make you Chakra UI-ify your components. So you can take in a regular component from any file, from any Vue as single file component or whatever, and just pass it into Chakra. And you pass it into this Chakra factory function, it gives you back a component that you can style using the Chakra UI props. And here's a demo of what that looks like. So here we have this hello world component that's been scaffolded by us by the Vue CLI. And so I'm going to import it into this app.vue.js file. And having imported it, I am then going to render it inside the template so you can see it such that it's visible. So we know it really does exist. And we do that by typing hello world. And okay, it shows. We'll pass in a few props to make sure the props are actually working. Good. And we'll try and do some Chakra style props, and you notice that they will not show because it doesn't know what these are. So we'll then import our Chakra function from Chakra UI Vue, and we'll then create a new component called see hello world and pass in our hello world component. We'll then rename the component inside that template to see-hello world, and with any luck we should see the red level 400 level red in the background, as you can see. And give it some padding, give it some, change the background color again so that it's, more visible, and there it is, just like that. Currently in 0.x, you can actually implement this using the vchakra directive, and we'll also be shipping that as well in this version. But if you needed, a more, lower level implementation of this, you can still use the Chakra factory function. So what about accessibility? What are the things that we're adding to the library? Chakra UI components are already built with, WAI ARIA accessibility compliance. But we'll also be providing a few JavaScript hooks that you can use in your application. For example, you can manage animations and transitions using the use reduced motion hook. We'll also be providing a use skip link, so you can also manage the skip links within your app. We're also providing a use announcer hook that you can use to announce peripheral information to users that use screen readers. And another thing I'm particularly also excited about is that we are migrating most if not all of our component tests into end-to-end testing with Cypress 7.0, which I believe Jessica is going to be talking about today, and I hope that everybody enjoys that talk, because I love what the team is doing at Cypress. And this will allow us to ensure that all Chakra UI components behave the same way that they would inside a browser environment. So in summary, the new theming API is helping us to rapidly author fully custom UIs on top of Chakra UI without having to sacrifice accessibility. Just because you have your design system looks different, it doesn't mean that you have to rebuild everything from scratch, including rewriting the button accessibility, adding the spinner loading props, doing all this just because you have a different Figma file. I don't think this is useful for developer resources. But with Chakra UI, it's very much bring us a step closer to bridging the gap between accessible UIs and design. So you don't have to be locked into Chakra UI's default. Chakra UI is made so you can override the styles and change the way components look. So what about tooling? So when it comes to tooling, Chakra UI components, we've also created Chakra UI components auto importing. We've made this possible both for Webpack and with Vite. So you don't have to import and register all components globally. You can import them as you need them, as you can when you consume them, and it also does it with tree shaking, so you don't have to worry about all that. So in your template, you just use the component and we'll handle that for you. So what about TypeScript support? We're now providing type definitions for all the Chakra components. So if you're using TypeScript, you will benefit. And also if you're using JavaScript as well, you also get IntelliSense as well for the plugin and theme extension IntelliSense. We'll also be exposing some internal hooks that we're using within the within the project, such as like the use theme, the use color mode, use clipboard, use focus lock, so you don't have to install another third-party library, so you can reuse these. You can do some of these small things, and some of these things are being used within the library, so we're then exposing them for consumers in case you might need some extra functionality. We'll have a special section in the documentation for these. So what about maintenance and contribution to Chakra UI? A lot of changes have been made. For the V1, we have rewritten the entire code base from scratch in TypeScript, and it makes it easy we have more confidence shipping to the users, as well as for contributors as well. It also makes it easier for you to contribute. We also set up a new monorepo with grouped packages, so there's better code organization, and we're proud of making improvements to it daily. We've added 3 core team members, so more people are working on Chakra, and we're always looking for people to help and contribute around the community. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to us on Discord. And if you would like to contribute in code and just write components for Chakra UI, we also wrote a very comprehensive contribution guide, so feel free to do so, to read it and and contribute. So when it comes to Pro UI components, what are we talking about here? So we provided a set of pre-built more advanced UI components on top of Chakra UI that you can use for your applications and for your marketing pages. All of these components are built on top of Chakra UI, and you can see they're already available for React, and will be, once Vue 1.0 is released, we'll then begin to do some early work on the pro version of Chakra UI Vue. And you can already see on the right hand side that there is a very beautiful vertical steps component that doesn't ship with the raw library, but it can be built with the raw library, or you can just get it from pro.chakraui.com. So Vue 1.0 is all about reducing the amount of code that you need to write, and being able to increase your productivity so you can focus on what your users want. And you can already start experimenting with it. You can do so by running yarn add Chakra UI Vue -next. And you should also take note that it's an experimental alpha release. The public API is not going to change. Most of it's not going to change. It's only the internal, probably some of the internals will be moved around. So most components are all going to stay the same way. So feel free to try it out, check it out, and play with the API, and let us know what you think. We're on Discord, or we can check out our GitHub as well. And to find out more about Chakra UI, get involved in the community. We have a documentation site. Yay! And so feel free to visit our documentation site to learn more about Chakra UI, what it's about. And follow us on Twitter as well, Chakra UI _Vue. And you can also follow us on GitHub and go check out what we're doing, see our roadmap, see what we're working on. And you can also join us on Discord. The link to the Discord is also in the documentation site. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening to me and for being a part of this conference. And I look forward to you trying out Chakra UI. And I wish you a great rest of your day. Cheers.
Fantastic. All right. Well, let's bring Jonathan back on really fast here. Cool. Yeah, that was fantastic. We do have one question from Sebrin in the chat. If I want to throw a screen reader, for example, on an application correctly built with Chakra UI Vue, how certain can I be that it will work perfectly?
I think the browser already ships with a screen reader, so I think it would work, right out of the box. Perhaps there is. I don't know if you knew this, but the browser actually does have an announcer API, so you could programmatically like announce things, to the user that uses a screen reader. It's not a very commonly done thing because if you properly use ARIA states and you properly use the right ARIA attributes, you do get like the expected response from a screen reader. But yeah, with Chakra UI, you almost never have to like worry about that. We'll actually enforce, like there's actually components that will fail if you do not include the right, like, for example, the ARIA, the icon button, for example, you need to give it a label or a description. So yeah, there's places like these we've made these compromises or enforced these kind of rules, so that you help you keep your application accessible. So yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right, I'm going to bring Sebrin and Leon back on here. Anybody else have any questions for Jonathan before we switch over and change gears a little bit?
Not directly.
Yeah, maybe a small one. When can we expect a better release? I know I'm a good one asking.
A
but-
beta. Yeah,
Yeah.
a beta. I keep thinking in maybe say about a month and a half. It's very hard to like say when exactly you're gonna get like a release, a new version of something. But
Yeah.
definitely, I feel confident it's in the near future. Most of the like components are like, especially like the layout components, the text components, and we recently started working on the off canvas components, which are probably the most challenging ones because they require a lot of like JavaScript and like, a lot of accessibility stuff. But these are kind of like on the tail end. So I would say it's very close. Just keep your fingers crossed,
Yeah. Yeah, it's already possible to play around with Chakra, especially with the factory. Yeah, it's
Yeah, a
really
lot of
awesome.
people like that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Jonathan. We'll let you go now and get some sleep.
Thank
it's
you for
very late
having
where
me.
you are. Yeah, thank you for
Thank you
coming.
so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.
A little bit early there. All right. Next up, we have Reinier. We have Reinier who is joining us. He's going to be giving us a talk about building better components with state machines. I'm really super excited about this.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I hope my audio is sufficient enough and that my neighbor who just planned to mow the lawn is not disrupting too much. So
That's the worst.
yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. This is the first time I'll be giving this talk, so might be a little bit rough around the edges, but I think we'll do fine.
Yeah.
I'm just going to share my screen real quick.
Awesome. Yeah, if you share it, I will throw it up. I'm gonna, Leon and Sebren, I'm gonna go ahead and pull y'all off unless you have anything insightful.
No, good luck. I'm looking forward to the talk.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right. Is this visible?
All right. Let me bring this up. All right. There we go. We have your screen. So,
Awesome.
Reinier, with that, take it away.
Okay, I will. All right. Thanks for joining me. My name is Reinier, and I'm here to give a small talk about writing better components with state machines. And today I'll be covering what state machines are, roughly, and so a little bit of theory, but then we'll dive into actually building a component in Vue. And we'll kind of take a more traditional approach, and then I'll try to show you how you can do it with state machines. And hopefully you'll think, hey, that's quite interesting. I might check that out. So with that, let's start. Let's do the boring part first. My name is Reinier Kaper. I was born in the Netherlands and raised there for the first 30 years. And then my wife and I decided to move to Canada, where we now live in Ottawa with our very lovely daughter. And we've been here for around 10 years now. And I work as the lead front-end developer at a company called Creative Layer. And I have, including myself, 4 front-end colleagues there, and we do all kinds of stuff, but we mainly build a couple of component libraries and our main application, which is called Workflow. And that application is basically a system that hooks into, for now, Shopify, but could be technically any e-commerce platform, and takes the whole order flow basically away from them, including the fulfillment. And we specialize in doing prints, so paper prints or prints on canvas. And we basically take that whole flow away from the company to be bothered with, and bring it all in one place, and walk them through all the steps from when the order comes in. They have to assign it to a designer. They get assets back. It has to go to the fulfiller and then shipped. That whole thing that happens in our system. So that's what we do. If you want, you can come follow me on Twitter. I'm fairly active on the VueLand Discord server as well. And on GitHub, I'm known as the Dutch coder everywhere, so it's easy to find me probably. So yeah, let's hop into the actual meat of the talk here. So I want to get 2 things across, I guess, today. The first thing is I want to make people familiar with the concept of state machines in sort of a more conceptual level, I guess. And then the second part, hopefully I can get you excited about actually starting to use them. I learned about state machines actually on the VueLand Discord by a guy that goes by the name of Blockhead. And he pointed me to it. I think we came to the subject because we were talking about Vues or some state management thing. And he told me, like, hey, have you ever looked into state machines? I hadn't, and I looked it up and watched some talks. I'll get back to that. And it was one of those epiphanies for me where I was just really asking myself, why is not everybody doing this? It was a similar feeling, maybe you can relate. If you go from standard CSS to like a preprocessor or something like that, like Sass or less, and you think to yourself like, hey, you know, why isn't everybody using this? This makes so much more sense. I had that exact same feeling with state machines, so hopefully you'll get the same thing. So let's dive into what state machines actually are, conceptually speaking. They're actually also called finite state machines, and they're mathematical models that basically describe behavior of a system, and that system can only be in one given state at any time. It also cannot be in no state, so it's always in one of the predefined states. And formally speaking, there's 5 pieces to a state machine. You have a finite number of states. You have a finite number of events that actually trigger the machine to go from one state to another. You have an initial state where you start with. You have a transition function that takes those events and then tells the machine, like, go to this new state. And then there's a set of final states, and that's really when the machine is done. And actually, when you're using state machines and components, you'll find that you don't always use an actual final state, or it's sort of in sort of this limbo state, I guess. But technically speaking, that's what state machines are. And I kind of want to illustrate this with a little example. It's a very sort of basic example, and I'll elaborate on it a little bit more. But if you think about your home, and most, especially North American homes, have some sort of climate control in their home, right? So you have a thermostat, and that's by default, it might be turned off. Then it might be in a cooling state during summer, or it's in a heating state during the winter. And it's always in one of these three states, right? So say I'm in the off state, and the off state receives a cool event, the thermostat will go into the cooling mode. Same if it receives a heating event from that cooling state, it might go to the heating mode, and then when from the heating mode it receives an off event, it goes to off. Obviously, in most, especially more modern thermostats, this is not sort of cyclical, but you can get from one state to all the other states, and that's totally fine. For example, from heating, you could get a cool event and it goes back to cooling. It's just to illustrate like how a state machine conceptually works. You're always in a certain state, you always receive an event, and then you go to a different state. So that's technically what a state machine is. And then there's this sort of addition to it, which is called state charts. And state charts basically build on top of state machines, just the model itself. It was introduced by David Harrell, I hope I pronounced it correctly, in '87. So people are like, oh, what is this new thing? No, like state machines have been around for a long time in mathematics, and for good reason, as we hopefully find out. And state charts kind of, I would almost say, superpower state machines. They give us a couple of nice things on top of it. So you have something called guarded transitions, which would be if you receive an event to go from one state to the next, you could actually prevent going to the next state if a certain condition wasn't met. We won't be really touching on that today, but for example, if you want to, fetch some data from a state machine, and there's a URL required to get the data from, and that URL is empty, but you still get like the submit event or the fetch event, you might say, hey, this URL is empty. I don't want to transition to fetching the data. I want to instead transition to something else like an error state. Then we have also actions, and actions can be used for a couple of different things. I personally mainly use them to update context of a state machine. We'll touch on that later, but context is basically sort of the data inside of the state machine. Those two things are fairly separated, so states and data. You can have parallel states, which is if you think about like a text editor, where if you want to be in bold and italic mode, those things could be toggled at the same time. So technically speaking, those would be parallel states. Because previously I said you can only be ever in one state at a given time, which is true, but in parallel states, you can be sort of in parallel substates at any given time. And then we also get nested states, and that's very useful if you do, for example, you have a loading state in a machine, but the thing you are loading is different depending on the event you get. You have some sort of like a collection of loading states that you can reference. We'll get to that later too. But you still are specific about what thing is loading, for example. So that will be a good example of nesting state. So an application of state machines in programming comes in the form of a very, very well-written library. It's written by David Khorshid. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, David. And he has written this JavaScript library that basically brings the concept of state machines and state charts to JavaScript. And specifically, he also created a Vue library. There's one for Vue 2 and for Vue 3. I'll be using the Vue 3 one today. And that gives us a composable function that takes in a configuration of a machine and then gives us three things back. It gives us a state back, a send function, and then the service. And the service is basically the machine running. So you could stop or start it, and there's all kinds of things you can do with that. The most important things for us usually are state and send. And state gives us basically an object back that tells us what state we're in currently. And then the send function you can use to send events to the state machine that then trigger those state changes. So that library is it's excellent. It's great. There's also a Discord called Stately. You should definitely check it out. People are super helpful there. They've helped me more than once with just all kinds of questions. It has very good TypeScript support as well, which I'm a big fan of. So definitely check that out. And David is just an awesome guy as well. He's always willing to help and one of those, sort of model maintainers, I could say. Okay, so, let's just, let's just go and write our component and actually show you what state machines can do for you in component land. So I'm going to, here we are, actually build a relatively simple component. So here you see, I hope you can read this well. I have a users component, and on the right here of my browser that's running Vite is hot reloading, so we can see what's happening. And we're going to display a list of users. Super easy. Everybody has written this component multiple times in their lives, probably. So let's go and dive in. And I'll do it sort of the more traditional way first. I just want to make clear there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. Maybe people even prefer to do it that way. So this is definitely not saying like you should change it. It's just to show you how you can do the same thing in state machines, and hopefully you can see sort of some of the benefits from it. So we're going to make this component that fetches basically a bunch of data, a bunch of users, and we're going to display it. So in order to do that, let's first, make this a little bit more reactive. So I'm going to live code that here, and I hope I won't mess up. So we'll see how that goes. I'm going to import ref, and we're going to say, make a list of users, and that's going to be a ref. And then we're going to return that to the template. By the way, if you don't use Vue 3 and you're still using Vue 2, xstate also definitely works with Vue 2. The syntax of Vue 3 might be a little bit different if you're not used to it. I hope it makes sense. It's not that difficult. Refs are just reactive elements really in Vue 3. So you'll probably, while watching this, also sort of get what it does. So we just want to say, okay, let's say if we have some users to display, we're actually going to go through these. And let's key this properly. And let's show the name. And we did something wrong, obviously, because I have a space here. Okay, here we go. So let's reload it just in case. Okay, so there's no user to display. That makes sense because we just give it an empty array and there's nothing there yet. So let's then, I'm going to create a quick reference to like some data that we're loading, and we're going to make a fake API basically. So we have John here, and then we have Mary here. And then let's create a quick API that will fetch our data for us. So we return a new promise. And we're going to make it fail, let's say 50% of the time, just to sort of simulate real life, I guess. I hope your APIs don't fail like 50% of the time, but you never know. So we do, let's see, so math is random. No, you know what? I'm first going to resolve it all every time because that just illustrates it a little bit easier, I think. Okay, so this is our fake API that we can call to actually get some users. So you know what? Let's write a method that does that for us. And it's going to call that API. If you're not familiar, by the way, with async await is exactly the same as using promises with the chaining with then and catch. It's the same concept. I just like a little bit better to write it. So don't sweat it if you're not familiar with it. And then in Vue 3, you have to use users.value for to store the result. So now we have a method for that. Let's call it And you see here, like I've set a timeout of 1 second, that after 1 second, our users appear. Fantastic. So that's a very basic implementation of like how we would fetch users, right? But while it's loading and you don't see anything yet, normally you would want to display some message to the user, right? So we want to have some sort of loading state. So this is sort of our first hint at states. You normally track states a little bit differently. So let's set something up. So we're going to make a new reference here, and we call it loading. And we're going to expose that to the template. And then, for example, say, just something like this. We're loading. If that loading value is true. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to be setting that loading value. So we start off by saying, you know what, as soon as we fetch users, we want to show the loader. And then we want to try catch and do a, oops, finally here. And let's move this logic into the try catch because this could potentially fail. So we'd have to think about that later. And then at the end, we always want to say loading equals false because we're no longer loading the data. So let's see if that does something. There you see it. There we go. So it starts in a loading state because fetch users was called. It shows a loading message. And then as it resolves, the results show up. Perfect. So that's a very basic way of implementing a loading state. But what if our data doesn't come back? If there's a network error or any other error, we need to do something with that. So let's do two things. First, let's make a variable that will have some sort of error message in it. So we're going to make a new ref, which is just an empty string by default. And then when we get an error back, we actually want to set that value. We want to expose it to our template, and then we want to show it. So in this case, I'm going to use an EM for it and say, well, if there is an error, show me the error. And actually, let's do it this way. And now let's actually make our API randomly fail. So when math random is over 0.5, we will reject with an error message saying like, oops, and otherwise we'll resolve the data. So let's see if something happens here. And it doesn't because I did something wrong here. Oop, I have a missing token somewhere. Let me see. This is the benefits of live coding, I guess. Oh, it's this one, of course. That should be a question mark. Okay, there we go. Okay, this loaded fine. Let's see if we can hit an error state. There we go. Cool. We have error handling in our very small component. So that's great, but you already start to notice that users is a piece of data, whereas loading and, error technically also a piece of data, but loading is more of a state. So your component is either loading or it's done loading. But technically speaking, if it's done loading, it could be in an error state or it could be in a success state. That's not very explicit in our component. We take care of it by making sure that loading is false when we're done, and setting the error message when we get an error. But it's more of sort of an implied relationship and not really explicit. So now that we have the error state, you could also think that, for example, what happens if you forget to set the loading value to false, right? That, like, we're all human. This is not state machines are not meant to be a sort of a silver bullet. It's just to show you that you can take away a little bit of those human errors that can occur. So if you would, in this particular case, it's not maybe not the best example because it's such a small component, but if your component becomes more complex and bigger, it's fairly easy to miss one of these things. And you could say, your test should warn you about that. They should catch that. And you'd be completely right in saying that, and I would agree. But it doesn't mean you can make life easier for yourself. So anyway, we'll get back to that when we use the state machines. So in case there's an error, maybe you want to say like, hey, maybe we should retry that fetch again and see, if we can get the right result back. So it would be nice if we could get like a little button that pops up in case there's an error, and that says retry. And when we click it, we actually just want to fetch users again. And I should expose it to the template then, that method. There you go. So now when loading fails, we can retry, and look at that, it works. But now we have this kind of weird state, because when we retry, our error had a message in it. So now we have to go in and say, like, okay, whenever we refetch our data, we should set the error message to empty again, because otherwise we always have an error message showing, and that's not what we want. We don't want it to show when we're successful. So let's see if we can get actually a non-error state here. There we go. So now our UI is exactly reflecting what we want, but it's a fairly manual process. Now at this point, we have, in my opinion, a not very complicated component. Let's move these out of the way. It's something that we probably all do, maybe multiple times a day or something like that. It works, it's fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but I find it's a fairly manual way of doing things, and it's not always clear. Like the data management and the state management kind of are together in one spot. So if we want to use state machines for this and illustrate what the power of state machines can be in like writing components, we can definitely do that. So let's first think about the different states we have. So in this component, we have, when the component mounts and nothing happens yet, we're in an idle state, we could say. Then there's a state where we fetch the data. We can call this loading. And then there's two possible outcomes. It either fails or it's successful. So there's an error state and a success state. So if you think about it from a state machine perspective, the component can only ever be in one of four states, which is idle, loading, success, or error. So from a state machine perspective, that makes a ton of sense. And then let's think about the events that can happen in the state machine. If we're in the idle state and we want to get some data, we could receive a fetch event. And when, for some reason, that was unsuccessful, we want to retry that fetch. There's two ways we can go about this. We can respond to another fetch event, or we can be even more explicit and say we want to create a new event called retry. And we'll get to, when we actually build the machine, we'll get to that. There's a benefit of doing it that way, because if a certain state can only receive a specific event, it becomes very explicit into as to what can happen from that state. So now that we thought about those different states that we can be in, let's build our machine. And we're going to use xstate for this. So we're going to make a new const, and we call it fetch machine. Oops, and we're going to import machine from xstate. Oops. And this lets us configure a state machine, and it can have a couple of different properties. And let me just sort of do the brunt of this work, and then we'll go through what this all means. So here we define just an ID for the machine to be identified with, what initial state the machine should be in. So let's say we start with idle because nothing's happening yet. Then we have something called context, which is an object, and you could kind of see context in this way as our data store. And then we have the important part, which is states. Now we just talked about how we can have an idle state, a loading state, a success state, and an error state. So let's make those. And we also said, well, if we're in the idle state, we want to receive the fetch event. And you define events through the on property, and then you can define event just like this. And then the shorthand for this is what state this event should lead to. So in this case, we want to go from fetch to loading. And then we also talked about that other event, the retry event. We'll define that here. And we also want to get into loading. funnily enough. Because if you're in the error state and you do retry, you just want to fetch new users again, or users actually. So I told you that you could also do this, fetch. And that's perfectly fine. You definitely can. I like to be very explicit about this because sort of from a semantic or from a user point of view, retrying something is sort of like it's a different action than an internal event where you fetch users. You might decide not to, doesn't matter. They both work. I just like to be a little bit explicit about it. And the nice thing is, if we look at, for example, the error state, with this definition, we say if we're in the error state, we will only respond to the retry event. So if I was in an error state and I would send a fetch event to the state machine, it would just not care. It wouldn't do anything, because that's not part of that state to respond to. It's not its responsibility, you could say. So it makes it very clear. Fair warning, sometimes it can be a bit confusing because you don't always realize what state you're in, especially in more complicated scenarios. And you send off an event, you're like, why is it not doing the thing that I tell it to do? In 99.9% of the cases, maybe even 100% of the case, it's just because that's the way you wrote your state machine. So if you expect the machine to do a certain thing in a certain scenario, you are responsible for writing it that way. And if you don't, the machine just won't do it. Okay, so let's now actually get into migrating some of the functionality from the component into the state machine. So the first thing we want to do is we want to grab our users, right? And state machines have this very nice option. When you enter a state, you can take an action. You can call a service, for example, and you do that with invoke. And what invoke does, it can actually do a couple of things. It can invoke other machines. It can invoke a function that returns a promise. There's tons of other things that I haven't even looked into. It's a very elaborate system. But in this case, we want to tell it to fetch some data. So we're going to tell it to fetch, and we'll get to the fetch later. And then there's two possible outcomes, on done and on error. And this is really just basically the promise handling, right? So if the promise resolves with data, we hit the undone, and then we want to be in the success state because our fetching of data was successful. But if there's an error, we want to go to the error state. And in addition, in order to actually do something, because this just tells it to load a fetch thing, a fetch service in this case, we haven't defined it yet, we have to set up something called services. And services can, like I said, can invoke all kinds of things. In this case, we're going to call fetch. So this fetch relates to this fetch service. And we just basically want to call our API. And our API that we, crudely written up here is just an async function that returns a promise that resolves or rejects. So in this case, if we're in the idle state and we get the fetch event, we will go into the loading state, and the loading state automatically will call the fetch service, which is this one, and that returns success or error depending on the promise. This might seem or feel a little bit like boilerplate, and in some cases it might be, but state machines are just JavaScript objects, and they're very, very easy and predictable to test as well. So you'd sort of have to stick with this, and it becomes sort of second nature when you work with this a little bit more. So now that we have this fetch event, let's see what's up next. We probably want to do something with the data. So both when it's successful or when there's an error. If it's successful, we want to store the result, right? So there's this nice thing that you can do with undone and on error as well. You can call actions. And I've talked about this previously with the state charts. They give you the ability to do things with data primarily. And they also take a target, and that's just going to be success. So that's really where you will end up after the actions are done. And we want to say, well, let's store our users when we get the result back. And you do that by defining actions this way. It lives next to services. And this is a little bit, honestly, a little bit of a more complicated syntax, I find. So this is the action we're calling, store users, which is defined here. And this will do something with the event that it gets back. And in this case, it will use a function called assign from xstate. And assign lets you basically mutate the data in the context. And the context is this piece here. So that's basically, like I said, sort of your data store in this case. It can transform the context. So you use assign in the following way. It takes a function that has the context, which is the machine's context, and then the event that it gets back from the promise. And then we want, oh, this is obviously not going to work. And then we want to do something with it. So in this case, we want to set the user's key, which is this one, to whatever data we get back from the event. And it's always event.data. And you can obviously return an object and destructure that and that kind of stuff. But in this case, we get users back and we store that on the state machine. So now when we call fetch and it was successful, store users will be called. It will take the data that comes back from the promise and stores that on the user's context object. So it will end up here. And this is all still fairly sort of, I don't know, like inaccessible, I guess. We'll see it when we actually use in the component how we can access all these things. But you'll see that it's actually quite straightforward. So now that we have that stored, we also want to make sure that the error message that we get back is also stored, right? So we can do the same thing here. So we'd say we create another action called store error. And the target is going to be error because that's the state where you want to end up. And let's then also add an error context property here that we can store the message on. And then we're just going to basically replicate this one. And the error is also going to be set to the data that we get back. So this, technically speaking, should give us a pretty solid sort of state machine where it can go through all the different states. It can receive events. It will store the data. Now what? OK. Now let's try and start implementing this in our Vue component. And what we're actually going to do first is we're going to remove all of this. We don't want it. And what we're going to do is we're going to import the xstate view composable, basically, and we'll use that to do stuff with our data and with our events. So to do that, we're going to create a destructured object, and there's this method called useMachine that we can call, and that comes from the Vue package, which is this one. So let's import it. Let's make sure that's the right name. And let's put in our fetch machine as the machine that we want to initialize. And then, as I mentioned in my slides previously, there's 3 things you can get back: state, send, and service. In this case, we're not going to be using the service. We don't really need it. It's just running there. But we do need the state and the send. And the state basically refers to what state the machine is in, but it also contains our context. So it's, practically speaking, basically the root of our machine, I could say. And then send allows you to send off the different events. So it can send the fetch or retry state machine. And then the state machine will take the event and the current state and decide what to do with it. OK, so now that we have that, let's expose it to our, actually, let me just remove all of this. This is just distracting. Let's return these things, so state and send. Now our component will obviously not work because we have references here that, that are no longer existing. So let's fix that up. The first thing we want to do is learn about a method called matches. So the state object has this nice helper method called matches, and it works in the following way. If the state matches loading, it will show this loading message. And the state that we refer to is the state that's included in here. So we have idle, loading, success, and error. And remember how I talked about having nested states? This matcher function is super nice because if you have nested states under loading that are like loading users and loading businesses and stuff like that, it will work in a hierarchical way. So if you do state that matches loading, it will match all of the substates, but you can get more specific. So you can have sort of a global loading matcher that shows like a loader on top of your page, but you could also do it on a per component or per piece of data, basically, basis. So that function gives us, just matches what state you're currently in. So if we're loading, we want to show a loading message. If we are in the error state, we want to show an error. Same goes for this one, the retry button. And that's all the, and then we have a success state. So if you want to show like a success message, you could do that with the same logic, state that matches equals success. Then, or not equals, but state matches success, then you could show something when you're in the success state. So that's the matcher function. It's incredibly useful. And then the second piece is getting the data out of the state machine, right? Because we had our users and we had our error message. Now, this might look a little bit convoluted, but there's ways around this. Well, just type it out. The state has a context key, and the context key is this one, and then the rest is just an object. So we can say state.context.users, context.users, and if that's larger than one, there's users, we can loop through it and show the users. And we can do the exact same for the error message, which would be state.context.error, and that will show us the error message. So let's see if we actually got to a workable thing right now. Not yet, because our application or our component starts in the idle state, but we haven't yet told it to fetch users, right? Like previously we would call the fetch user method directly, but now we want to tell the machine, hey, go get the user. So send an event. And there, to that end, we have the send function. And you can write a click handler and use the send function in your setup function. You can also directly use it in your template. So let's do that. It's much easier. Actually, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do it here. So when the component mounts, we actually want to directly grab the users. So let's send off a fetch event. And I think technically the syntax for this is this, where you send a type, but the shorthand works too. So when the component mounts, we send a fetch event, and it should, in theory, load the users. Look at that. I just didn't get the right names, I think. I'm not entirely sure why. Okay, we'd have to look into that. So it is rendering something. It's just not rendering the right thing. That's because this should not be length. There we go. Okay, so our component mounts. We send the fetch event to the state machine. The machine knows, hey, I'm in the idle state. I get a fetch event. So let's look at that. I'm in the idle state. I get the fetch event. Let's go to loading. The loading invokes that fake API call, does something with the users or something with the error, depending on what happens. So let's see if we can hit that error state. That will be interesting. And then from there, we could, here we go, implement the retry. So let's do that. And remember, we're now in the error state. Like we per definition know that's the state we're in. And the only thing that the error state receives is that retry event. So let's send a retry event. And there we go. And it's working. And now I'll also show you what happens if we send the fetch event again. Because remember how we said to be very explicit about this, the error state doesn't take a fetch event. So I can click it. I'm clicking it, nothing happens because the state machine knows it's not something I should respond to. Therefore, I'm not going to do anything. So let's revert this. And now we have a functioning component. And in most cases, you would actually extract the machine into its own file. It has a couple of advantages. The main one is that it's very easy to test. and then it can live in isolation. So let's take a look at, let's just do that real quick. Let's make a new machine.js file. And let's fork all our, sorry, this is a bit hard to read with this scale. Let's fork all of this over to that machine file. There we go. The only thing we have to do is we have to export it in order to make this work. And then we can import it. So let's move this. We can import fetch machine from our machine file. And oops, am I not importing that correctly? Probably not. I'm probably missing something here. Let me just double check that real quick. Machine is not defined, obviously, because we have moved all of this out of there. And this needs to live in here, because this is actually where we define the machine. And now you see that. Let's refresh it just to make sure. There you go. It's functioning. It's trying to get our users. Seems to fail quite often. Here it works. And now I just want to show you how concise our component has become when you move that machine out. That logic lives on its own. You can write that machine before you even write a single line of your component code. And you exactly know what's going to happen. And what I like about this is that your component has now technically become an expression of the state that the state machine is in and the data that it has. You're no longer tracking like Booleans and that kind of stuff to see like if you should show an error or not. It's all managed by the state machine, and your component becomes just like I said, an expression of the different states that machine can be in. Obviously, you're still responsible for implementing it. So if you want to show a success message or have different buttons in different states, you obviously still have to write that, but the logic behind it is kind of abstracted away. And when I saw one of David's talks, I think it was at a React Conf, and he was so good at explaining this that I thought, like, why are people not using this? Why isn't everybody learning this thing? Because in my opinion, it makes it so much easier to write your components. It's super predictable, and yeah, that's just what I loved about this technology, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. So that's really what we end up with, and I kind of want to point out a couple of different important things, and then we'll round this off. So as I said, the UI has become an expression of our state machine. I think that's a very important takeaway. All our states in the machine are explicit. You can never end up in an unexpected state. There are no real edge cases, so to speak. I mean, you still have to write them, obviously, but at least it's very explicit. And all the logic within the machine, all the logic of the component is actually within the machine, and our component just renders things. So I think those are, at least in my opinion, important things to think about. So to recap, what have we done? We have moved logic into the state machine. Our component has become an expression of the state machine, and you can't really end up in unexpected states or mixed states or whatever like that, or anything like that. You're just, you're responsible for writing that machine, and everything is explicit. So that's really all I have to say about that. I hope this was illustrative for most people. I sincerely hope people get excited about this and at least read up on it. Definitely go and check out the XState documentation. It can be a bit overwhelming because it's such a big system. I barely scratched the surface here. In all honesty, my knowledge is fairly limited on the whole state machine subject, I guess. But dive into it, see what it can do for you. I would maybe not recommend moving your entire application over to everything state machine driven, but definitely start with a couple of small components just to get a feel for it and just see if it will help you in writing better code, because in my opinion it really does help. So that's about it, and sorry for the bad pun. Maybe some time for some Q&A.
Yay! Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Yes, this
No,
is.
I'm just sharing my screen.
No, you're fine. Yeah, thank you. This is fantastic. I think we've all like super really enjoyed this talk. There's been a lot of amazings in the chat, and yeah, Sebrin, you had a question. It looks like did he answer it though? Because I think he might have.
Yeah, it looks like David gave me a very clear answer on it.
Yeah,
It was
just
about
but
reusing
yeah,
the
I'll
machine.
I'll let Reinier answer it though, so that we have it on video proof that he
What
understands
was the
things.
question?
So
Yeah, go for it.
okay. So I assume that I can reuse the fetch machine in other components as long as the context is a little bit like yeah, is a little bit. Okay, there goes my question. As long as the context matches, right? So
Yeah, so if you would just reuse the same machine, you can definitely reuse it in multiple applications. The tip that David gave me is to write a factory function that actually, where you, for example, could take the API call, whatever, as an argument. Also, maybe an object that defines the context of the machine. So you can definitely use a factory function to reuse the fetch machine, but then expect different data. I'll be completely honest that that's a lot easier in JavaScript than it is in TypeScript, because then you have to, define all the generics for that kind of stuff. And that's where I sort of sometimes hit the wall. I'm like, okay, this is probably going to take me 5 or 6 hours to figure out for a little bit of benefit. I don't know. On the other hand, it's really good practice. So yeah, you can definitely reuse it. And just a little bit challenging sometimes with TypeScript, but there's people that are way better at TypeScript than I am that can definitely help with that. So yeah.
all right, awesome, thank you.
Cool. So I guess I have a question. So
Yeah.
is this a potential, like, could you potentially use this as like a replacement for Vuex? Like, could you use it as a centralized data store?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is I'm not sure if you should. And so for me, it's kind of funny because when I started working with state machines, I sort of realized that the Vuex is not actually a state manager. It's a data manager. Like, it just stores pieces of data, and some of that data expresses itself as a state, right, as a loading or an error or whatever. But you still have that implicit relation. So if you update different properties in Vuex, they could still lead to an edge case, right? Because they're just sort of flat things that don't have any awareness of each other. So from a technical point of view, you can use it. I use it as a global state manager in a very limited way. So for example, in our app, we have a user object that comes from AWS Cognito, and we have a business object. So because you're always logged into a business, it makes sense to have certain data available globally. So we kind of use a state machine there that when you log in, it sends a login event to the state machine with the user object and stores it there. So from that perspective, it makes sense, and especially in Vue 3, where you can import composables, and it becomes much easier to share that kind of stuff. Would I dump all my data in one big global state machine? Probably not, because in my opinion, it's very useful for UI-driven things. And sure, you could argue your entire app is one big UI, but it makes more sense to split it out into more component level state machines, maybe on a router level. I know someone's working on an XState driven router, and it makes perfect sense because a router is also very sort of event focused, right? You go to a new URL, you can only be in one place at the same time. So from that perspective, it makes sense. But in all honesty, my knowledge of it doesn't go that deep to give you any sort of really good advice on it. I've used Vuex extensively in the past, and I still think it's great. I just don't currently use it, but there's lots and lots of reasons to still use it.
Yeah.
It's just that our project doesn't really scale for it that well. So, but yes.
Cool. Mark in the chat, who's a friend of mine, he hails from Atlanta with me. He says, seems like the data in context could be synced with Vuex as needed.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I've read a blog post, I think, on exactly that, where a person combined the two, and I can definitely see the benefit of that. Yeah, so I believe it's fairly easy to integrate. After all, XState itself it's just a JS library that has this ginormous object that you can do stuff with. So the applications are pretty much endless.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that's everything. It was a great talk. Everybody's loving it. This is really fantastic. I learned a lot. I'm now super excited about, oh, maybe I need to be using XState to write state machines for everything now. So cool. Leon, Sebrin, do you have anything else you want to ask before we go?
I would maybe ask, because like I'm not sure if it's really answered, but like for the Vue 3 suspense feature, like can you utilize this in combination with the XState's different values that you showed?
And in all honesty, I haven't used the suspense feature at all yet, so I'm not qualified to give you any sort of real answer on that. I would think so, but I have no idea how to work, just because I don't really know what the suspense component does internally. So, but I think so. That might be a good question for someone on the Stately Discord, or even maybe in the Vue Discord. So that's a good one. I will look it up. I'll get back to you on that.
Cool. Yeah. So if anybody out there knows, let us know, and we will make sure that we put it out into the world. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up then. Thank you, Reinier, and thank you, Jonathan, who's not here at the moment. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate it greatly. If anyone who is watching wants to give a talk for World Vue Summit, please let us know. We're on Twitter at world_view. And you can reach all of us on various parts of Discord. We're in Vueland. And if you are a meetup organizer for Vue.js, please let us know. We would love to invite you to the organizer Discord for various meetups around the world. We would love to be able to talk to you and coordinate with you, and maybe use some speakers that you've had and that you think are really good and that you would like to have a wider audience for. So please let us know. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you want to keep up to date with what we're doing, make sure that you hit like and subscribe down below in the thing. And yeah, that's it for this month. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.